I worked night shifts as a nurse for almost 6 years before this happened, and in all that time, the thing I feared most was never really the hospital itself. It wasn't the codes, the losses, the long 12-hour stretches where you don't sit down once. It was the parking garage. I want to start there, because I think most people who've never worked a job like mine don't understand how much of the fear in a story like this lives in a place that has nothing to do with medicine at all. It lives in 5 concrete levels of empty stairwells and flickering lights between the hospital doors and your car. The garage attached to the hospital where I worked was 7 stories, poured concrete, the kind of structure that swallows sound in strange ways, where a footstep 2 levels down can echo up through the stairwell and sound like it's right behind you. I parked on level 5 most nights because the closer levels filled up during the day shift and never emptied out by the time I left at 7 in the morning. Level 5 meant a walk. It meant an elevator ride, or 5 flights of stairs if the elevator was being serviced, which it seemed to be more often than any elevator has a right to be. There's a specific kind of vigilance that comes with working in healthcare that I don't think translates well to people outside it. You spend 12 hours managing other people's emergencies, staying calm through things that would floor most people, and then you walk out into a garage at an hour when almost nobody else is around, and your body doesn't know how to downshift out of that state quickly. Every nurse I've ever worked with has a version of this story, some near miss in a parking structure, or a walk to a car that felt longer than it should have. And most of us trade those stories the way other people trade small talk, casually at the nurse's station, because it's such a common thread in this line of work that it barely registers as remarkable anymore. Mine started the same way most of theirs did, ordinary, until it wasn't. This happened in February, which matters because in February it's still dark at 7 in the morning when a night shift ends. Dark in that flat, gray, pre-dawn way that doesn't feel like night or morning, just an absence of both. I came off a hard shift, the kind where you're moving on autopilot by the end of it, badge already in hand before I'd even reached the stairwell door, mind still half processing things I'd need to remember for the handoff report I'd already given 20 minutes earlier. I heard the door behind me open just as I stepped into the stairwell. Not unusual. Other staff finish shifts around the same time I do, and the stairwell door swings on a slow hydraulic hinge that groans the same way every single time, so at first I didn't think anything of it. I started up toward level 5, and the footsteps behind me started too, a level below, matching pace in that particular way that only becomes noticeable once you've been listening for a while without meaning to. I want to be honest about how long it took me to actually start paying attention, because I think that delay matters to the story. For the first flight and a half, I told myself it was just another employee heading to their own car on their own equally exhausted morning. It was only around level 3 when the footsteps sped up slightly the moment I did and slowed again the moment I did that the specific cold recognition set in. Someone was matching my pace on purpose. I stopped completely on the level 4 landing, right by the door leading out to the parking level, and I listened. The footsteps stopped too. Not immediately, a half-second later, just long enough to tell me it wasn't a coincidence, that whoever was behind me had needed a beat to register that I'd stopped and adjust accordingly. I stood there in that stairwell, badge still in my hand, heart going harder than any 12-hour shift had managed to make it go, and I did the thing every safety training seminar tells you to do, and almost nobody actually does until they're standing exactly where I was standing. I opened the door to level 4 instead of continuing up to 5, stepped out into the open parking level, and walked fast toward a cluster of cars near the elevator bank where the lighting was better. I didn't hear the stairwell door open behind me. I don't know if that means he stopped following or if he simply stayed in the stairwell, patient, waiting to see which way I'd go next. I stood by those cars for almost 10 minutes, phone in hand, ready to call security, watching that stairwell door through the reflection in a parked car's window because I didn't want to turn my back on it directly. Nobody came out. Eventually, I called a coworker who was still inside finishing charting, and she walked out with hospital security to meet me, and together we went up to level 5 to get my car. Nothing was there. No one was there. The whole level looked exactly the way an empty parking garage at 7 in the morning is supposed to look, which somehow made the whole thing feel less real and more unsettling at the same time, the way a bad dream feels stupid to describe out loud in daylight, even though the fear of it was completely real while it was happening. I want to tell you I was more careful after that, and I was for a while. I asked a coworker to walk out with me most mornings. I started parking closer, even if it meant circling the garage twice at the start of my shift, waiting for a spot to open on a lower level. I carried my keys laced through my fingers the way you're taught to in every self-defense class that ever gets recommended to women who work jobs like mine, which is a small, almost embarrassing gesture in hindsight, a piece of metal that wouldn't have done much against anyone determined enough to actually close the distance, but it made me feel like I was doing something, and sometimes that's the only thing keeping you functional enough to get through a shift. I mentioned what happened to a few coworkers over those first few days, half expecting someone to tell me I overreacted, that it had probably been another exhausted employee walking at an unlucky pace behind me. Instead, 2 separate nurses told me, quietly, almost like they'd been waiting for someone else to say it first, that they'd had similar moments in that same stairwell over the past year. One of them described a man standing motionless on the level 2 landing at 4 in the morning, not moving, not speaking, just standing there when she passed, gone by the time she glanced back a few seconds later. The other said she'd started taking the elevator exclusively after a night she swore she heard someone breathing behind her on an otherwise empty landing, close enough that she felt it, though when she turned around, there was nothing there. Neither of them had filed a report. Both of them told me in almost the same words that they decided it probably wasn't worth the trouble, that security would just chalk it up to nerves and a spooky old garage. And maybe they were right to expect that, because in some ways, that's exactly what happened when I filed mine the first time, too. Nothing happened for almost 3 weeks. I let myself relax in the way you always let yourself relax after a scare, telling yourself it was a one-time thing, a stranger who happened to be walking the same direction at the same unfortunate pace, nothing more sinister than bad timing dressed up by an exhausted, frightened mind into something worse than it actually was. Then, on a Tuesday night in March, I clocked out at my usual time, walked to the stairwell with a coworker as had become my routine, and she peeled off toward level 3 where her own car was parked, leaving me to continue alone up to 5, because by then 3 weeks of nothing happening had worn the edge off my caution more than I want to admit. I heard the footsteps again on level 2. Same pace, same pattern, speeding when I sped, slowing when I slowed, stopping dead the moment I stopped, that half-second delay in the stop that told me with total certainty this time that this wasn't a coincidence and never had been. I didn't wait around to test the theory a second time. I pulled out my phone and called hospital security while I was still moving, gave them my location, my level, kept my voice as steady as I could manage while climbing stairs 2 at a time toward the nearest exit onto a parking level instead of continuing up. The security guard who responded found me on level 3, breathing hard, back against the wall near the elevator, watching that stairwell door. He checked the stairwell himself, walked the full length of it from bottom to top. Nobody was there. No one had come out any of the exits on any level, according to the badge access logs that track when each stairwell door opens, which meant, as far as anyone could piece together afterward, that whoever had been following me either left through an exit that doesn't log activity the same way, or somehow got out of that stairwell without triggering a single recorded door event in a building full of them. That detail bothered the security supervisor almost as much as it bothered me. He told me, carefully, that stairwells like that one are designed so every door swing gets logged, precisely for security incidents exactly like this one, and that having a moving, breathing person disappear from a fully monitored space without a single recorded exit wasn't something he had an easy explanation for. He didn't say it was impossible. He just said it wasn't something the system was supposed to allow, and left the rest of that sentence for me to sit with on my own. He walked me through the log himself, on a laptop in the security office, scrolling through time-stamped entries for every door on every level, going back through the whole shift. My badge appearing and disappearing exactly where you'd expect. Level 1 at 7:02, Level 4 at 7:06, back out onto the parking level a minute later. And nothing else. No unidentified badge, because whoever it was clearly hadn't used one, but also no manual door open event of the kind the system logs, even for someone simply pushing a door without a badge, the kind of mechanical trigger that doesn't care who you are, only that a door moved. He checked it twice, pulled the maintenance log to rule out the sensor malfunctioning that night, found nothing wrong with it. The system had worked perfectly. It had simply never registered a second person passing through those doors at all, despite two separate witnesses on two separate nights hearing exactly that. I started parking off-site after that, in a lot 2 blocks from the hospital that the facility had an arrangement with for staff overflow, small enough that a security guard actually walks the rows a few times a shift, well lit in a way the parking garage, for all its size, had never quite managed to be. It cost me an extra 10 minutes each way, walking to and from the hospital instead of a covered garage, and some nights that 10 minutes in the open air felt more frightening than the stairwell ever had, because at least in the stairwell I could hear someone coming. Outside, in the dark, sound scatters differently, and you can't always tell which direction a footstep behind you is actually walking from. I never found out who it was. The hospital increased security presence in that garage after my second report, added a guard who does a rotating patrol through the stairwells during shift change hours, which I'd like to think helped, though I have no way of knowing whether it actually stopped anything or simply made whoever it was more careful about when they chose to follow someone. I stopped hearing those footsteps after I switched to the off-site lot, but I also stopped being in the one place he apparently knew to look for me, so I've never been able to tell whether that means the danger passed or whether it just moved somewhere I happened to no longer be standing. I still think about that camera footage sometimes, the 15-second delay between when I entered that stairwell and when he did, which meant he'd been close enough at 7 in the morning to see exactly which door I walked through and choose to follow within a quarter of a minute of me disappearing from view. I think about the badge logs that never recorded an exit. I think about a building full of doors that are supposed to account for every single person who passes through them, and one person who apparently didn't need to be accounted for at all. I talked to hospital administration about the stairwell more than once after that second incident, pushing for something more permanent than an occasional patrol, better lighting, cameras with clearer facial coverage on every landing instead of just the entrances. Some of it happened, eventually, months later, after enough of us had filed enough reports that it became harder to treat each one as an isolated, unconnected event. I don't know if that changed anything for the nurses who came after me. I hope it did. I think about them sometimes, walking that same stairwell at 7 in the morning, badge in hand, and I hope none of them ever hear a set of footsteps that stop exactly half a second after theirs do. If you work a job that ends in the dark, whether that's early morning or late at night, and there's a parking structure between you and your car that swallows sound the way mine did, I want you to trust the version of yourself that notices footsteps matching your pace before you fully let yourself believe it's real. That half-second delay when they stop after you do isn't your imagination working overtime. It's the only warning you're going to get, and it's usually enough time to change direction if you're willing to listen to it the moment it happens instead of a full flight of stairs later, the way I did.